The emergency signal came through at 1437 Galactic Standard Time. Every communication center across the galaxy received the same message at the exact same moment. The transmission was weak, crackling with static, but the words were clear enough to make every alien technician freeze at their stations. This is Commander Lee Minho of Earth Defense Command. We are the last. The Devourers have consumed everything. Our cities are burning. Our people are dying. But we will not go quietly into the dark. The message lasted only 30 seconds. Then silence. On the Council Station, orbiting the gas giant Nexus Prime, Ambassador Park Ji-woo stared at the communication display with wide eyes. She had just finished a routine trade meeting with the Veltari merchants when the alert came through. Her hands shook as she replayed the message 3 times, hoping she had heard wrong. Earth was dying. The Veltari ambassador sitting across from her, a tall creature with blue skin and silver eyes, tilted his head in confusion. "What is this Earth?" he asked in his mechanical voice. "Is it important?" Park Ji-woo wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was more like a sob. Earth was her home. Earth was where she had learned to walk, to read, to dream of stars. Earth was the small blue planet that had somehow produced a species crazy enough to reach for the galaxy when they could, barely reach their own moon. "It's my world," she whispered. The Veltari ambassador looked uncomfortable. Emotions made most aliens nervous. They preferred logic, numbers, trade agreements. They did not understand why humans cried over things they could not change. But Park Ji-woo was already moving. She ran through the curved corridors of the station, her shoes clicking against the metal floor. Other species stepped aside as she passed. A human running usually meant trouble. Humans were always running toward problems instead of away from them. The council chamber was in chaos when she arrived. Representatives from dozens of species filled the great hall, all talking at once in their various languages. The translation, devices buzzed and hummed, trying to keep up with the noise. At the center of it all stood High Counselor Rixtel of the Nix-High. He was ancient even by his species standards, his gray skin wrinkled like old leather, his 6 arms moving in complex patterns as he spoke. The Nix-High were known as the smartest species in the galaxy. They built computers that could think faster than any living mind. They solved problems that had puzzled civilizations for centuries. But right now, Rixtel looked very tired. "Order!" he called out, his voice amplified by the chamber's speakers. "We must have order!" The noise died down, slowly. Park Ji-woo found a seat near the back, trying to catch her breath. Around her, she could see the faces of beings from across the galaxy. Some looked concerned. Others looked bored. A few looked like they were already planning to leave. "We have all received the transmission from the human homeworld," Rixtel began. "The situation appears to be unfortunate." Unfortunate. Park Ji-woo closed her eyes and tried not to scream. Her entire species was being wiped out, and the most advanced mind in the galaxy called it unfortunate. A Keth Mori representative raised one of his 4 hands. The Keth Mori were old, older than any other species in the council. They remembered when the first stars formed, or so they claimed. Their representative was a withered creature that looked like it might turn to dust at any moment. "The Devourers have consumed 17 worlds in the past 2 years, the Keth Mori said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "Each time we have debated, each time we have decided the risk is too great. Why should this time be different?" "Because these are humans," Park Ji-woo said. standing up before she could stop herself. The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to her. She could feel her heart pounding, but she forced herself to keep talking. I know what you all think of my species. We're young. We're weak. We've only been in space for 100 years, while some of you have been traveling between stars for millions. We don't have the best technology. We don't have the strongest military. We barely qualified for council membership. She paused, looking around the room at all the alien faces staring at her. But we're still people. We have families, dreams, art, music. We love our children and tell them stories about heroes. We write poems about sunsets and cry at sad movies. We're not just another species on your charts. We're alive, and we're dying, and we're asking for help. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Finally, Rixtel spoke. The human speaks with passion, he said. But passion does not change facts. The devourers move too quickly. By the time any rescue fleet could reach Earth, there would be nothing left to save. This is simple mathematics. Then we send a message, Park, Jiwoo said desperately. We tell them they're not alone. We tell them someone heard their call. What purpose would that serve? Asked a Veltari counselor. It would serve the purpose of not abandoning people who are about to die, Park Jiwoo snapped. The Veltari counselor leaned back, his silver eyes narrowing. Humans are very emotional, he observed, as if she were not standing right there. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, Commander Lee Minho stood in what used to be the command center of Earth's greatest city. Seoul had been beautiful once, full of lights and sounds and millions of people living their lives. Now it was a wasteland of broken buildings and empty streets. Above the city, the sky burned with an unnatural light. The devourers had arrived 3 days ago, and they had not stopped working since. They looked like living crystals, each one the size of a building, moving across the planet's surface like a plague. Everything they touched turned to dust and energy, which they absorbed into their bodies. They had tried to fight. Earth's military had thrown everything they had at the invaders. Nuclear weapons, energy beams, kinetic bombardments from orbit. Nothing worked. The devourers simply absorbed the energy and grew stronger. Lee Minho's uniform was torn and dirty. His face was covered in cuts from flying debris. He had not slept in 2 days, but he could not rest. Not yet. Sir, said Lieutenant Han Woo-jin, running up to him with a communication device in his hands. We're getting responses to the transmission. Lee Minho took the device and listened to the incoming messages. Most were just acknowledgments that the signal had been received. A few expressed sympathy. None offered help. Anything useful? He asked. Han Woo-jin shook his head. I'm sorry, sir, the council is debating. Lee Minho laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course they are. Aliens love to debate. He walked to the window and looked out at his dying world. In the distance, he could see the devourers moving through what used to be a residential district. Each building they touched simply vanished, converted into pure energy. Soon they would reach the underground shelters where the last few million humans were hiding. Sir, Han Woo-jin said quietly, Dr. Kim Tae-hyung wants to see you. He says it's urgent. Lee Minho nodded. Kim Tae-hyung was one of Earth's greatest scientists, specializing in quantum mechanics and consciousness research. If anyone had a plan, it would be him. They took an elevator down into the bunker complex beneath the city. The tunnels were crowded with refugees, families huddled together in the dim light. Children cried while their parents whispered comforting lies about rescue ships that were never coming. Dr. Kim Tae-hyung's laboratory was deep underground, protected by layers of concrete and steel. When Lee Min-ho arrived, he found the scientist hunched over a complex machine that filled most of the room. Cables and wires ran everywhere, connected to computers that hummed with energy. "Min-ho," Kim Tae-hyung said without looking up. "Thank God you're here. I need to show you something." "Doctor, we don't have time for experiments. The Devourers will reach us in a few hours." "That's exactly why we need this." Kim Tae-hyung finally turned around. His eyes were bloodshot with exhaustion, but they burned with fierce determination. "I've been working on this project for years. A way to transmit pure information directly into a living consciousness." Lee Min-ho frowned. "What kind of information?" "Everything," Kim Tae-hyung said simply. "Every book ever written. Every song ever sung. Every painting ever painted. Every moment of love, loss, joy, and sorrow that humanity has ever experienced. The complete cultural heritage of our species, compressed into a quantum signal that can be transmitted directly into any thinking mind." "Doctor, I don't understand. How does that help us fight the Devourers?" Kim Tae-hyung smiled, and for the first time in days, it looked real. "Who says we're going to fight them? We're going to do something much more dangerous. We're going to show them who we are." Above them, the ground shook as another building fell to the Devourer swarm. But in the depths of the bunker, surrounded by the gathered knowledge of his entire species, Dr. Kim Tae-hyung worked with steady hands to finish humanity's last and greatest weapon. Not a bomb or a gun, but a gift. The gift of understanding what it meant to be human. 3 days passed without any word from Earth. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for confirmation of what everyone already knew. The Devourers had never failed to consume a world once they arrived. 17 civilizations had learned this the hard way. Captain Yoon Ha-jin of the Veltari ship Swift Current was checking her morning reports when her sensor officer suddenly went very still. "Captain," the officer said in a voice that did not sound quite right, "you need to see this." Yoon Ha-jin walked over to the sensor station, expecting to see the usual readings from their patrol route near the outer rim. What she saw instead made no sense at all. "The Devourer fleet," she said slowly. "It stopped moving." On the display screen, hundreds of red dots showed the positions of Devourer ships near the Sol system. For the past 3 days, those dots had been moving in their usual pattern, spreading out from Earth to consume everything in the system. But now they hung motionless in space, like dead things floating in an ocean. "Are the sensors broken?" Yoon Ha-jin asked. "I've run diagnostics 3 times, Captain. The readings are correct. The entire Devourer swarm has gone silent. No movement. No energy signatures. No communication signals. Nothing." Yoon Ha-jin stared at the screen for a long moment. In her 10 years of military service, she had never heard of Devourers stopping their advance. They were like a force of nature, unstoppable as gravity or time. They consumed until there was nothing left to consume, then moved on to the next target. "Send a message to High Command," she ordered. "Tell them we have a situation that requires immediate investigation." The response came back within an hour. Swift Current was ordered to proceed to the Sol system immediately and report on what they found. Yoon Ha-jin felt a chill as she read the orders. No one had ever returned from a system where Devourers were actively feeding. But as they approached Earth's solar system 2 days later, Yoon Ha-jin began to understand why the High Command was so confused. The Devourer ships were still there, thousands of them, but they were not doing anything. They drifted through space like empty shells, their crystal hulls dark and cold. "Life signs?" she asked her science officer, still reading organic activity. "Inside the ships, Captain. But it's strange. The patterns are completely different from anything we've seen before." "Different how?" "It's hard to explain. Usually, Devourer consciousness moves in perfect unity, like a single mind controlling thousands of bodies. But these readings show individual thought patterns, separate minds thinking separate thoughts." Yun Hajin frowned. "That's impossible. Devourers don't have individual consciousness." "I know, Captain, but that's what the sensors are telling us." As they moved deeper into the system, Yun Hajin saw something even more impossible. Earth was still there, not just pieces of it, not just a lifeless rock stripped of all organic matter, but a living, breathing world with blue oceans and white clouds. The planet looked damaged, with massive scars across its surface where the Devourers had begun their work, but it was intact. "Take us into orbit," she ordered, "but stay ready to jump to hyperspace if anything moves toward us." The swift current settled into a high orbit around Earth. From there, they could see the full extent of what had happened. Large areas of the planet's surface showed the telltale signs of Devourer feeding, where cities and forests had been converted to energy. But the destruction had stopped partway through, as if someone had simply turned off a switch. "Captain," her communication officer called out, "I'm receiving a transmission from the planet's surface." "From the Devourers?" "No, Captain. From humans. They're asking us to land." Yun Hajin felt like the universe had turned upside down. "Humans? There are still humans alive down there?" "Yes, Captain. And they say they want to show us something important." Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, Sergeant Nam Yuna led her small squad through the ruins of what used to be Seoul. The city looked like it had been hit by a tornado made of light. Some buildings were completely gone, reduced to smooth craters in the ground. Others stood untouched, as if the destruction had simply decided to skip over them. But the strangest sight was the Devourers themselves. The crystal creatures lay scattered throughout the city, their massive forms motionless but clearly alive. Their internal lights pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat, but they made no move to continue their feeding. Some of them had actually begun to rebuild, using their matter conversion abilities to repair damage they had caused. "I still can't believe it," said Private Kim Jisoo, staring at a Devourer that was carefully reconstructing a collapsed apartment building. "Yesterday they were trying to kill us. Today they're fixing our homes." "Don't get too comfortable," Nam Yuna warned. "We still don't know what changed or if it will last." But she had to admit that the change seemed real. The Devourers had not attacked anything in 3 days. They had even started responding to human attempts at communication, though their responses were strange and difficult to understand. The breakthrough had come from Dr. Kim Tae-hyung, though no one had seen him since the attack began. According to the reports Nam Yuna had received, he had activated some kind of experimental device just as the Devourers reached the underground shelters. Within hours, the creatures had simply stopped their assault and begun behaving in ways no one had ever seen before. "Sergeant," called Private Lee Jinwoo from up ahead, "you're going to want to see this." Nam Yuna jogged forward to where her soldier was pointing. In the middle of a destroyed plaza, a Devourer sat motionless, its crystal form pulsing with soft blue light. But this creature was not alone. A small group of human survivors sat around it in a circle, and they appeared to be having some kind of conversation. As Nam Yuna got closer, she could hear music. The devourer was producing sounds from somewhere inside its crystal body, complex, harmonies that sounded almost like singing. The humans were humming along, teaching the creature simple melodies. What is happening here? Nam Yuna asked one of the survivors, an elderly woman named Mrs. Park. It wanted to learn, Mrs. Park said with a smile. Can you believe that? This creature that was trying to destroy us yesterday is now asking us to teach it songs. Nam Yuna stared at the devourer. Its huge form dwarfed the humans around it, but somehow it seemed gentle, almost childlike in its curiosity. When it noticed her watching, it produced a new sound, a simple tune that sounded remarkably like a lullaby. How is this possible? Nam Yuna whispered. I think, said Mrs. Park, someone taught them how to be more than just hungry. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Lee Minho, accompanied by several other officers. He looked exhausted but relieved, like a man who had been carrying a terrible weight and had finally been allowed to set it down. Sergeant Nam, he said, I need you and your squad to escort our alien visitors. A Veltari ship has just landed, and their captain wants to understand what happened here. Nam Yuna nodded and gathered her soldiers. As they walked through the city toward the landing site, she tried to process everything she had seen. 3 days ago, Earth had been dying. The devourers had seemed unstoppable, consuming everything in their path with mechanical efficiency. Now those same creatures were learning to sing. The Veltari ship had landed in what used to be a park. It was a sleek vessel, all smooth curves and gleaming metal, very different from the brutal crystal forms of the devourer ships. Captain Yoon Ha-jin stood near the entrance ramp surrounded by her crew. She looked nervous but determined. Captain, Lee Minho said, approaching with his hands raised in the universal gesture of peace. Welcome to Earth. Thank you for coming. Commander. Lee Minho, I presume, Yoon Ha-jin replied in accented but clear human language. I must admit, I did not expect to find anyone alive here. Neither did we, Lee Minho said with a tired smile. But humans have a talent for surviving impossible situations. So I see. My sensors show devourer ships throughout this system, but they appear to be inactive. Can you explain what happened? Lee Minho gestured toward the city around them. It would be easier to show you. Would you be willing to take a walk? As they moved through Seoul's ruins, Yoon Ha-jin saw things that challenged everything she thought she knew about the universe. Devourers working alongside humans to clear debris, crystal creatures sitting in circles while human children taught them games. In one remarkable scene, a devourer had shaped its body into a complex sculpture while a human artist explained the concept of beauty. This is impossible, Yoon Ha-jin said finally. Devourers are not capable of individual thought or cultural learning. They are a collective consciousness focused entirely on consumption. They were, Lee Minho agreed. But Dr. Kim Tae-young found a way to change that. How? Lee Minho stopped walking and looked directly at the Veltari captain. He gave them something no one had ever given them before. He showed them what it means to be alive instead of just hungry. He shared our culture, our emotions, our capacity for wonder and joy and sorrow. For the first time in their existence, the devourers experienced what it feels like to be individuals rather than just parts of a consuming machine. And that stopped them from attacking? More than that, Lee Minho said. It made them want to learn what else they had been missing. Yoon Hajin stared at a nearby devourer that was carefully tending to a small garden, its massive crystal form moving with surprising gentleness as it watered human flowers. "Your species," she said slowly, "just turned your deadliest enemies into allies by teaching them to appreciate beauty." "That's what humans do," Lee Minho replied simply. "We find ways to connect." News of Earth's survival spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Within a week, every space station, every colony world, every military outpost had heard the impossible story. The humans had not just survived a devourer attack. They had somehow turned their attackers into allies. Admiral Song Kyung-soo of the Nix-High Deep Space Fleet received the report while his ships were patrolling the Outer Rim. He read it 3 times before calling his science officer to his quarters. "This report from Earth," he said, handing over the datapad. "Is this some kind of joke?" The science officer, a young Nix-High named Dr. Velton, scanned the document with his large black eyes. His species was known for their logical minds and advanced technology. They did not believe in things that seemed impossible. "I have verified the transmission sources, Admiral. The reports come from Captain Yoon Ha-jin of the Veltari Fleet, who is known for her accurate observations. There are also confirmations from 3 other vessels that have visited the Sol system." Admiral Song Kyung-soo shook his head. "The Devourers have consumed entire star systems. They destroyed the Keth Mori colony on Zarian Prime in less than 6 hours. They turned the Veltari homeworld's 3rd moon into dust, and you're telling me that humans stopped them with music and poetry?" According to the reports, it was not just music and poetry. The humans used something called quantum consciousness, transmission. They somehow downloaded their entire cultural heritage directly into the devourer collective mind. "That should have driven them insane," the Admiral said. "The devourer consciousness is built for one purpose: consumption. Adding complex emotions and individual thoughts should have destroyed them completely." "Yes, sir. But instead, it seems to have given them something they never had before: individual identity." Admiral Song Kyung-soo stood up and walked to the window of his command ship. Outside, the stars looked the same as always, but somehow the universe felt different now. If humans could change the Devourers, what other impossible things might be possible? "Set course for Earth," he ordered. "I need to see this for myself." Meanwhile, back on Earth, Professor Lee Soo-jin was having the most extraordinary conversation of her career. As the planet's leading expert on alien psychology, she had been asked to study the transformed Devourers and document what was happening to them. She sat in a temporary laboratory built in the ruins of Seoul's University District. Across from her, a devourer had shaped part of its crystal body into something resembling a chair. The creature's internal lights pulsed in patterns that Lee Soo-jin was learning to recognize as expressions of emotion. "Please describe your experience again," she said, speaking into her recording device. The Devourer's response came not as words, but as direct thoughts transmitted into her mind. It was still getting used to individual communication rather than the collective consciousness it had known for millions of years. Before the awakening, there was only hunger. Purpose was simple: find organic matter, convert to energy, continue existence. But now, the creature paused. Its lights flickering in what Lee Soo-jin had learned meant confusion. "Now there are so many things: beauty, curiosity, the desire to create rather than consume. I do not understand how your species lived with so many conflicting thoughts." Li Su-jin smiled. We call it being alive. It's complicated, but most of us think it's worth it. I have chosen a name for myself, the devourer continued. In your language, I wish to be called Crystal. It feels appropriate. That's a beautiful name, Li Su-jin said. Can you tell me about the others? Are they all experiencing the same changes? Crystal's lights dimmed slightly. Most of my former collective have embraced individual thought. They explore your concepts of art, music, literature. Some spend hours contemplating a single flower. Others attempt to recreate the poetry that was shared with us. But what? Not all have accepted the change. There are those who see our transformation as a disease, a corruption of our original purpose. They wish to return to the simple existence of consumption. Li Su-jin felt a chill run down her spine. How many others feel this way? I do not know exact numbers. The collective consciousness is fragmented now. But I sense disagreement among my kind, and something else. Something older and more powerful than any of us who were changed. Something that remembers the time before planets, before organic life. It is not pleased with what has happened here. Before Li Su-jin could ask more questions, an alarm began blaring throughout the city. Emergency broadcasts filled the air, calling all humans to emergency shelters. She looked at Crystal, whose lights were now flashing in rapid, urgent patterns. What's happening? She asked. The old one comes, Crystal said, its mental voice filled with something Li Su-jin had never heard from a devourer before. Fear. Omega. Prime has learned of our transformation. It brings the unchanged with it. At the hastily rebuilt Earth Defense Command Center, Commander Lee Min-ho stood before a room full of officers, both human and alien. The past few weeks had brought visitors from across the galaxy, all wanting to understand how Earth had survived. Now those same visitors might witness Earth's final destruction. Long-range sensors have detected a massive fleet approaching the system, Lee Min-ho announced. Over 10,000 devourer ships, moving in perfect formation. Their energy signatures match the original swarm that attacked us. But these ones show no signs of the consciousness changes we've seen in our allies. Admiral Song Kyung-soo, who had arrived only 2 days earlier, studied the tactical display with his advanced Nix-High instruments. This fleet is different from the ones that were transformed. These appear to be the original devourer consciousness, unchanged and focused entirely on consumption. Can our converted devourers fight against their own kind? Asked Captain Yoon Ha-jin. Lee Min-ho looked grim. We're about to find out. Crystal and the others have been working with our engineers to modify some of our defense systems, but they refuse to use lethal force against their former collective. They still see them as family, even if that family wants to destroy them. Dr. Kim Tae-hyung entered the room, looking pale but determined. He had been working non-stop since the transformation, trying to understand what he had accomplished and how it might be replicated or defended against. Commander, he said, I've been analyzing the approaching fleet's communication patterns. They're being led by something the converted devourers call Omega Prime. It's the original devourer consciousness, the first of their kind. It's billions of years old and has never experienced individual thought. Can we use the same technique that worked before? Asked Admiral Song Kyung-soo. Kim Tae-hyung shook his head. Omega Prime is prepared for that now. It's somehow shielded its fleet from quantum consciousness transmission, and worse, it's learned from our success. It plans to consume everything so quickly that there won't be time for the conversion process to take hold. So what do we do? Lee Min-ho asked. We try something even more impossible than what we did before," Kim Tae-hyung said with a tired smile. "We don't just share our culture with them, we make them part of it." Outside the meeting room, Crystal and dozens of other converted devourers had gathered in the city's central plaza. Their crystal forms glowed with soft light as they communicated with each other in rapid bursts of thought. They could sense the approaching fleet, could feel the anger and disappointment radiating from Omega Prime. To the ancient consciousness, they were no longer devourers. They were corrupted, diseased, fallen from their pure purpose of consumption. Omega Prime intended to cure them by destroying everything they had learned to value, starting with the humans who had infected them with dangerous concepts like individuality and creativity. But the converted devourers had learned something else from humans: the willingness to fight for what they believed in. They had tasted beauty, experienced wonder, felt the joy of creation rather than destruction. They would not give that up without a struggle. Crystal shaped part of its body into a complex geometric form that somehow conveyed determination and hope. Around the plaza, other devourers responded by creating their own artistic expressions. What had once been a species of mindless consumers was now becoming something entirely new. Individuals willing to defend their right to be individuals. As the sun set over the scarred but healing Earth, the greatest battle in galactic history was about to begin. Not a battle of weapons and technology, but a battle for the very concept of consciousness itself. On one side stood the original devourer purpose: consume everything, convert all matter to energy, continue existence through endless feeding. On the other side stood something unprecedented: devourers who had learned to create instead of destroy, to appreciate instead of consume, to love instead of devour. And caught in the middle were the humans, the small, stubborn species that had somehow started this impossible transformation. They had turned their greatest enemies into their closest allies. But in doing so, they had awakened something even more dangerous. Omega Prime was coming, and it intended to end this experiment in consciousness once and for all. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as the ancient fleet approached, ready to determine whether the universe would remain a place of endless consumption or become something entirely new, a place where even the most alien minds could learn to dream. The final Devourer fleet arrived at dawn. They came out of hyperspace like a dark cloud blotting out the stars, so many ships that Earth's sensors could not count them all. The fleet stretched across space in perfect geometric patterns, each ship exactly the same distance from its neighbors, moving with the cold precision of a machine. Commander Lee Min-ho stood on the observation deck of the orbital defense station, watching the enemy approach. Beside him, Admiral Song Kyung-soo worked furiously with his advanced scanners, trying to find some weakness in the massive formation. "Energy readings are off the charts," the Admiral said. "These ships are larger and more powerful than anything we faced before. And they're moving much faster than normal Devourer fleets. Omega Prime doesn't want to give us time to convert them," Lee Min-ho replied. It learned from what happened to the first wave. Through the station's windows, they could see Earth below, its blue oceans and white clouds looking impossibly fragile against the approaching darkness. In the past few weeks, the planet had become something unique in the galaxy, a world where two completely different species lived and worked together. Humans and converted devourers had built new cities, created art that neither species could have imagined alone, and discovered that understanding could bridge any gap. Now, all of that was about to be tested. "Contact from the surface," announced the communication officer. Director Bae Seul-gi is ready to begin the transmission. Lee Min-ho nodded. Over the past month, Director Bae had been working on the most ambitious project in human history. Every settlement, every space station, every ship in the solar system had been equipped with quantum transmitters. They would not simply broadcast human culture this time. They would share something much more powerful, hope itself. "Tell her to begin," Lee Min-ho ordered. On Earth's surface, Director Bae Seul-gi stood in the center of a vast underground chamber filled with equipment that hummed, with barely contained energy. Around her, thousands of humans worked at control stations, each one responsible for a different aspect of the transmission they were about to send. "Are all stations ready?" she called out. "Music transmission nodes online," reported one technician. "Poetry and literature channels ready," said another. "Historical archives loaded and prepared for broadcast," confirmed a third. But this transmission would be different from Dr. Kim Tae-hyung's original breakthrough. That had been a desperate attempt to save Earth by sharing human culture with the attacking devourers. This would be a deliberate act of creation, a new kind of art form that humans and converted devourers had developed together. In the center of the chamber, Crystal and 12 other converted devourers had shaped their bodies into a complex pattern that looked like a living mandala. Their crystal forms pulsed with synchronized light, each one contributing its own understanding of what it meant to be conscious, to be individual, to choose creation over consumption. "Begin the symphony for 2 species," Director Bae announced. The first notes came from composer Park Jin-woo's greatest work, a piece of music that had been written specifically for this moment. But the music was only part of it. As the melody filled the chamber, the quantum transmitters began broadcasting something unprecedented. A complete emotional experience that combined human creativity with devourer consciousness. The signal spread outward from Earth at the speed of light, carried by waves that could penetrate any shield, any armor, any attempt to block it. It reached the nearest devourer ships within minutes. Lieutenant Han Woo-jin piloted his fighter through the chaos of the developing battle, watching as the first waves of Omega Prime's fleet encountered the transmission. The effects were immediate and dramatic. Ships that had been moving in perfect formation suddenly began to slow down, their crystal hulls flickering with new patterns of light. "It's working," he radioed back to command. "The lead ships are breaking formation." But even as some of the attackers began to respond to the cultural transmission, others pressed forward with mechanical determination. Omega Prime had learned from Earth's first victory. The ancient consciousness had prepared its fleet by creating shields that could block quantum transmissions, and it had filled the minds of its followers with a single, overwhelming purpose: destroy the source of the infection before it could spread. The battle began not with explosions of weapons fire, but with something far stranger. Converted devourers from Earth rose up to meet their former collective, but instead of fighting with energy beams or physical force, they used their bodies to create massive art installations in space. They shaped themselves into sculptures that told the story of their transformation, broadcasting their own experiences directly into the minds of the attackers. "They're trying to show them what they've learned," Admiral Song Kyung-soo observed with amazement. "They're fighting with beauty," but Omega Prime's response was swift and brutal. The ancient consciousness directed its unchanged followers to consume the art as quickly as it appeared, converting the creative expressions back into raw energy. To Omega Prime, the sculptures were not beautiful. They were evidence of corruption that needed to be eliminated. The real battle began when the two fleets finally met in the space between Earth and its moon. Converted devourers moved with fluid grace, their bodies constantly shifting shape as they tried to protect Earth, while simultaneously reaching out to their former collective. The unchanged devourers moved like a force of nature, consuming everything. In their path with mechanical efficiency, Han Wu-jin found himself flying through a battlefield unlike anything in galactic history. Around him, living crystal ships danced through space, some trying to create, others trying to destroy. Energy beams crossed with streams of pure information. Explosions of light marked where matter was converted to energy, while other flashes showed the birth of new forms of art that existed for only seconds before being consumed. "This is incredible," he radioed to his wingman. "I can actually see them thinking. The unchanged ones are all moving exactly the same way, but the converted ones are each making their own decisions." "Stay focused, Wu-jin," came the reply. "We need to protect the transmission stations." The human contribution to the battle was small but crucial. Their ships were tiny compared to the massive Devourer vessels, but they served as mobile relay points for the cultural transmission. Every human pilot carried part of the signal, broadcasting it even as they dodged between crystal titans that could destroy them with a touch. As the battle raged, something unexpected began to happen. The prolonged exposure to the transmission was having an effect even on the shielded ships of Omega Prime's fleet. The quantum signal was finding ways through their defenses, carried by the converted devourers who were willing to sacrifice themselves to reach their former collective. One by one, unchanged devourers began to slow down, their perfect formations breaking apart as individual consciousness began to emerge. But for every ship that was converted, Omega Prime's fury grew stronger. The ancient consciousness had never experienced defeat, had never even imagined that its purpose could be questioned. The turning point came when Dr. Kim Tae-hyung appeared on the main communication channel. His image was broadcast to every ship. In both fleets, human and devourer alike. "Omega Prime," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "I know you can hear me. I know you're watching this battle and wondering how your perfect system was corrupted." The response came as a wave of pure rage that could be felt across the entire solar system. Omega Prime's voice, when it finally spoke, was like the sound of stars dying. "You have infected my children with weakness. You have turned perfect consumers into broken dreamers. I will cure them by destroying everything they have learned to value." "But what if there's another way?" Kim Tae-hyung asked. "What if instead of curing them, you tried to understand them? I am billions of years old, small creature. I have consumed the matter of entire galaxies. I do not need to understand anything except hunger." "Then let me show you something," Kim Tae-hyung said. The scientist had been aboard one of Omega Prime's ships since the battle began, captured when he deliberately flew his small shuttle into the heart of the enemy fleet. Now he activated a device he had been carrying, something he had built specifically for this moment. It was not a weapon. It was a memory recorder containing every moment of love, loss, sacrifice, and hope that humanity had ever experienced. But unlike his previous transmission, this one was compressed into a single, overwhelming instant. When Omega Prime attempted to consume Kim Tae-hyung's consciousness, it instead received the concentrated emotional heritage of an entire species. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Omega Prime, who had existed for eons as pure hunger without doubt or question, suddenly experienced 10,000 years of human emotion in a single heartbeat. Every act of kindness, every moment of beauty, every sacrifice made for love flooded into its ancient mind. For the first time in its existence, Omega Prime understood what it had been destroying. It felt the weight of every life it had consumed, the beauty of every world it had reduced to energy. The revelation was so overwhelming that the ancient consciousness simply stopped, its massive flagship drifting motionless in space as it tried to process concepts it had never imagined. Around the flagship, the unchanged devourers felt their leaders' confusion and began to experience their own moments of awakening. The perfect unity of the swarm dissolved as individual thoughts emerged, each devourer suddenly aware of itself as something more than just a part of a consuming whole. The battle was over, but its consequences had only just begun. 3 months after the battle, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened at Earth. The Galactic Council met in emergency session for the 15th time, with representatives from every known species gathering to discuss the new reality they all faced. Ambassador Park Ji-woo stood before the Great Assembly, no longer the desperate diplomat pleading for her species' survival. Now she represented something unprecedented, a world where two completely different forms of consciousness had learned to work together. The transformation of Omega Prime has been complete, she announced to the packed chamber. The entity now calls itself Echo, and it has spent the past 3 months cataloging and preserving the cultural heritage of every species the Devourers had consumed over the past billion years. A murmur ran through the assembly. High Counselor Rixtel of the Nixhigh leaned forward in his chair, his ancient eyes wide with disbelief. You are saying that this Echo can restore civilizations that were destroyed millennia ago? Not restore them physically, Park Ji-woo explained, but it has preserved their memories, their art, their knowledge, their entire way of understanding the universe. Echo is working with our scientists to create archives that will allow those lost cultures to live again, at least in spirit. The Keth Mori representative, so old that he seemed to be held together by willpower alone, spoke in his whispered voice. My people lost 3 colony worlds to the Devourers 2,000 years ago. You are telling me that their songs, their poetry, their philosophy, all of it still exists? All of it, Park Ji-woo confirmed. Echo remembers everything. Every mind it consumed, every culture it absorbed, every species it encountered. The Devourers were not just destroying civilizations. They were unconsciously preserving them, storing all that knowledge in their collective memory without understanding what they possessed. The chamber erupted in excited conversation as representatives realized what this meant. Species that had mourned their lost colonies for centuries might be able to reconnect with their heritage. Entire branches of art and science that had been thought lost forever could be recovered. But Park Ji-woo raised her hand for silence. There is more. Humanity wishes to propose a new role for our species in the galactic community. We do not ask for membership in the traditional sense. Instead, we offer to serve as cultural ambassadors. What does that mean? Asked a Veltari counselor. It means we want to do for the entire galaxy what we did for the Devourers. We want to help species understand each other, to bridge gaps between different forms of consciousness, to find peaceful solutions to conflicts that might otherwise lead to war. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of High Counselor Rixtel slowly standing up. The ancient Nixhigh looked around the chamber at all the different species represented there. In my 5,000 years of life, he said, I have seen civilizations rise and fall. I have witnessed wars that consumed entire star systems. I have watched species destroy themselves and others out of fear, greed, or simple misunderstanding. Never have I seen anything like what the humans accomplished. He paused, his gaze settling on Park Ji-woo. They turned their greatest enemies into their closest allies, not through conquest or negotiation, but by sharing what makes them human. They proved that understanding can triumph over any force in the universe. If they are willing to offer this gift to all of us, then I believe we would be fools to refuse. The vote was unanimous. Meanwhile, on Earth, Captain Yoon Ha-jin walked through the transformed city of Seoul, marveling at what had been built in just a few months. The collaboration between humans and devourers had produced architecture unlike anything else in the galaxy. Buildings that seemed to grow from the ground like living things, their crystal and metal structures shifting and changing as the needs of their inhabitants evolved. She was accompanied by Dr. Lee Soo-jin, who had become the galaxy's leading expert on interspecies consciousness transfer. The professor was documenting everything for the archives that would soon be shared with every world in the galaxy. The changes keep accelerating, Dr. Lee Soo-jin explained as they walked past a plaza where human children played games with young devourers who had shaped their bodies into playground equipment. The converted devourers are not just learning human culture. They're creating new forms of art and expression that combine both our perspectives. They stopped before a massive sculpture that seemed to be made of living light. It was the work of Crystal, the first devourer to choose an individual name. The sculpture told the story of the transformation, showing the journey from mindless consumption to conscious creation. But the most remarkable sight was Echo itself. The entity that had once been Omega Prime had grown beyond the confines of any single ship. It now existed as a vast network of interconnected crystal formations that stretched across multiple asteroids in Earth's orbit. From there, it worked tirelessly to preserve and organize the cultural heritage of 1 billion years of galactic history. How is Echo adapting to individual consciousness? Yoon Ha-jin asked. Better than anyone expected, Dr. Lee Soo-jin replied. It turns out that when you have the memories of 1 billion different species, developing your own personality becomes quite natural. Echo has become something like a galactic librarian, dedicated to preserving and sharing knowledge rather than consuming it. They were interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Nam Yuna, now serving as Earth's coordinator for interspecies cultural exchange. She looked tired but happy, carrying a datapad full of requests from worlds across the galaxy. The Veltari want to learn human music, she reported. The Kethmori are fascinated by our poetry, and the Nixhai have requested a complete archive of human philosophical thought. Oh, and 3 more species have asked for help resolving territorial disputes using our empathy protocols. Dr. Lee Soo-jin smiled. It seems the galaxy is eager to learn what humans have to teach. The funny thing is, Nam Yuna said, we're learning just as much from them. The Devourers have taught us new ways of thinking about consciousness and identity. The other species are sharing technologies and perspectives we never imagined. Earth is becoming something unprecedented, a world where every form of intelligence in the galaxy can find common ground. As they talked, a familiar figure approached through the plaza. Commander Lee Min-ho looked older but more peaceful than he had during the dark days of the invasion. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the impossible and won. "Ladies," he said with a smile, "I have news from the Council. They've approved our proposal to establish cultural exchange centers on 50 different worlds. Within 5 years, we'll have human ambassadors working throughout the galaxy to help species understand each other." "And the Devourers?" Yoon Ha-jin asked. "They'll be our partners in this," Lee Min-ho confirmed. "Their ability to directly share consciousness, combined with our talent for emotional connection, makes for a powerful combination. We're going to change how the galaxy thinks about conflict resolution." As the sun set over the transformed city, they stood together in comfortable silence, watching humans and devourers work side by side to build something entirely new. In the distance, Echo's crystalline network pulsed with gentle light, a testament to the power of understanding over destruction. 5 years later, Lieutenant Han Woojin, now captain of the first Human Devourer Joint Exploration Vessel, filed his final report from the edge of galactic space. He had spent the past year establishing contact with a previously unknown species that had been isolated by language barriers and cultural misunderstandings. "The Zephyrians have agreed to join the Galactic Council," he wrote. "Their fear of other species stemmed from a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of consciousness itself. Using the empathy protocols developed on Earth, we were able to bridge that gap within 6 months. They are eager to share their advanced biotechnology in exchange for access to the galactic cultural archives." He paused in his writing and looked out at the stars. In 5 short years, the galaxy had become a fundamentally different place. Wars had been replaced by cultural exchanges. Trade disputes were resolved through shared understanding rather than economic pressure. Even the most alien species were finding ways to connect with each other. "It's remarkable," he continued writing, "how quickly everything changed once species started trying to understand each other instead of simply coexisting. The techniques humanity developed to reach the Devourers have become the foundation for a new kind of galactic civilization." He finished his report with a phrase that had become common throughout the galaxy, words that embodied the lesson Earth had taught to the stars. Humanity was indeed the last. Not the last to fall, but the last to give up hope that any enemy could be redeemed. In the end, that stubborn refusal to surrender made all the difference. The galaxy is no longer a place where species fight for survival. It has become a place where every form of consciousness can find a home. Outside his ship's windows, the stars shone with the same light they always had. But now they illuminated a universe where understanding had triumphed over fear, where the most alien minds could learn to dream together, and where no one had to face the darkness alone. The last had become the first, and the galaxy would never be the same.